Welcome, Lester. Welcome, Richard.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just first wanted to say, for those of you who were here on Wednesday, we'd like to thank you very much. It was a very constructive session, so thank you for that. Just my apologies for the absence of David Warburton today. He was required to be in Wellington. Richard is going to step in for David today. I guess, a few points. We had a very interesting time with the change in government and, I guess probably some instability, but from Transport's point of view, a huge opportunity. Important to remind councillors that while the reviews of the GPS and ATAP are underway, it's the future direction that we need to focus on, not the documents, and that's really an important emphasis. AT is well placed around most of the likely scenarios. We're in very constant contact with Wellington, particularly NZTA, around the evolution of these documents, and there will be significant changes to the GPS, and the timing of those are just indicative at the moment, but probably going to happen reasonably quickly. It was interesting to have, as you know, Sir Michael Cullen is on the board of Auckland Transport. It was interesting his views at the meeting on Wednesday. We've got a very narrow window to do the right thing, and we should take it. And the key message, I guess, for us, our board, to our management, is just remain focused on our customers, not on the headline construction projects, because really important as we evolve from an infrastructure organisation to a mobility as a service. I want to touch on light rail because this is obviously a signature initiative for the new government. As you know, it's been an active consideration for the board, and since we first raised this issue, we've kept the development work underway, which we have obviously self-funded. Hasn't been any funding from NZTA, and we've developed it to a sophisticated level, so the opportunities before us, and I guess before the government in Auckland, will be able to exercise pretty quickly, actually. One thing to note on this is we are working closely in partnership with NZTA on the development of light rail case for government. Just being realistic, NZTA has got a lot of obviously planning and construction and particularly civil experience. One thing that is not often thought about, and I have discussed this with NZTA, and they do understand this, is I think it is not well understood the mechanical and electrical experience and expertise that lies within AT. So these projects are not just civil projects. The intricacies are around information technology, electrical and mechanical, and a lot of that expertise resides in Auckland Transport. But that relationship with NZTA and that joint working is progressing very well, and I've just come off a call earlier this morning with Fergus Gammy, as we are in a transition process with the CEOs, myself, Wayne Donnelly and Mark Gilbert, as a small governance group, are sitting very tightly as a close oversight from a governance perspective on light rail. Light rail is a tremendous opportunity to unlock Auckland. Every mode has its lovers and its haters, but the reality is if light rail is being used as a substitute for congested bus, it's a very effective outcome, and we expect that to be the case. And we will need to move quickly to implement. The new Minister of Transport has got a real sense of urgency, probably a greater sense of urgency, I think, than most people realise. So we are doing a lot of work to support this project. In terms of business as usual, the quarterly report, I guess, demonstrates both the complexity of our business and the range of things that we're already doing mostly quite well. The board is concerned with value for money, which is a concern of the Mayor and the Council. You'll know we did a value for money review previously, and we have implemented all of the recommendations of that. That was 2015. There are 5 board-led reviews at the moment, which focus on value for money, but also other issues, and they're around public safety, they're around road safety, facilities management, asset management, and public transport. And we will obviously share the outcome of those and the recommendations with the council. We have recently provided a note on our view on value for money to Mayor Phil Goff, and I think it tells a good story that we are constantly at work on this. By the way, I should probably say that our reviews are complementary to the Section 17 reviews that the council is doing. They're not instead of, or they're very much complementary, but they're looking at areas that we have concerns about. And I'll just say on this point, we have a serious concern about road safety. The death and serious injury rate is very worrying at the moment, and Richard will talk to that. Many of you will have hopefully have had a chance to have heard the speaker from Sweden, Dr. Balkan, about Vision Zero. That's definitely a concept that we are very highly attracted to, and subject to discussions with the mayor and the council. I would think that's likely to be a direction that we'd like to head into. We do have to do something different. There is a challenge of technology and innovation. For example, our board is considering the threat of cyber attack, which is quite a serious threat for autonomous vehicles. Apparently, the two areas that are most at risk for cyber threat, no matter what you do, are hospitals, sadly, and autonomous vehicles. Okay. So there's a lot of work being done in Israel, actually, which is a leading country in this. They're actually developing a village where they're building a hospital, not with patients, but everything else, and a little kind of town for autonomous vehicles. And they are putting this under a real stress test in order to enhance the cyber capacity. There was a recent delegation that visited Israel in this regard, and Dame Paula Repstock was part of that, one of our board members. But this isn't holding us back from looking at ways of leveraging technology, but there's a lot we need to do about cyber threat. Just as an example, our new parking app will reach 40,000 customers today. It's been rated 4 stars in the App Store by users, so this is all moving in the right trajectory. We need to redouble our efforts, both in areas that we do well, like PT, and those which present the greatest challenges as Auckland grows, and obviously the topic of congestion, but road safety, which I've just mentioned. For the rest of the 2017-18 year, there's a significant challenge. Our focus, though, needs to be well beyond that, although there will be a lot of activity, particularly relating to the implementation of a number of the government's new priorities, which actually align very well with the council's priorities and Auckland Transport's priorities. Mr. Chair, I'll just pass on to Richard to take us through the first quarter report, unless there's any questions before we start that.
Welcome, Richard.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Look, I'll just rattle through a few slides quite quickly, really, and leave the time available largely open to questions. I think the quarterly report you've got in front of us, financials looking reasonably healthy. We're about $1 million over in revenue and about $1 million under in expenses. That's a lot tighter than there has been in the past, and a lot tighter than I'd like, but it's certainly on the right side of the ledger in both cases. Our program delivery, as we get to the last year of the current LTP, we're on track to deliver most of the capital and operating targets that we expected to deliver. We're at about $125 million on our capital program this year. About half of that's renewals and land purchases. So the other half, if you like, is some of our big programs like the Banakau bus interchange, which is on track for opening early in the new year and so forth. And of course, our stewardship of the asset base we've got at the moment is where it should be. The challenges, as our chair mentioned, around death and serious injuries. With 9 months of the year gone, in the actual report in front of you, it says it's an annual measure, so we haven't put the numbers in there. But year to date, we've had, for the first 9 months, 630 serious injuries in Auckland, compared with 464 for the same time last year. 630 plays 464. That's a 37% increase in deaths and serious injuries in a 12-month period, and that's of serious concern, really. This isn't something we've just stumbled across. The ELT had its first serious strategy session on this back in March, actually. The board has also had a couple of reports on this where they've challenged the numbers and the causes behind it, and as our chair mentioned, the board's initiated an overseas expert that's currently looking at what we're doing and what's causing this and so forth. But it's an issue that's both nationwide and worldwide, where those numbers are starting to revert after years of good news.
Sorry, Richard, could I just make one point? The epidemiology of these accidents, and I'm saying these accidents, not just road-related accidents, is actually not well understood at the moment. Because, for example, on the hospital side, where I get a good sense of this, there's a massive increase in injuries just across the board, not just related to transport. So, for example, the number of acute orthopedic cases has risen way beyond the growth in the population. So from a public health perspective, we have people looking at what the underlying epidemiology of this is, and if we do adequately understand the changes to the population and the growth in the population, the impact that this does have on accidents. One point I'll say, which is literally heartbreaking, is the significant number of people killed in road accidents who were not wearing seatbelts. It's a massive number. And the fact that we just can't seem to get that right is of absolutely deep concern. And the other thing is that we have had, as you would see in the newspaper, there's often multiple fatalities and serious injuries in one accident. So, like, this is really gone to the top of our list. It's all of our problem, and once we get this review, we should share it and talk more about it. But this is an area where we've got no choice but to do a lot better.
No, thank you. Look, we had a good session on Wednesday, so I won't dwell on this particular slide. I think certainly one of the biggest challenges in the last quarter has been preparing for the next round of strategic planning. Some of our new members on the board talked about the confusion between the Ministry of Transport and NZTA and LTPs and RLTPs and RPTPs and a bunch of documents. If it's confusing for new board members, my points at the bottom of the slide there is around, remember we've got a community out there that's probably even more confused, and part of our job needs to remain very connected to those. We've started talking to local boards and to mana whenua about what's going to happen next. We mustn't get buried in planning processes. We need to keep our head above the water and focus clearly on where we're heading, because a lot of what we are going to be doing is known or is emerging, and we don't need, it's our job as officials to make the paperwork line up, but not to drown the likes of you people in that paperwork. Public transport, it's very difficult to talk about Auckland Transport's performance without mentioning that, but we don't have the usual slide of more records being broken with over 90 million journeys now. Out on the right-hand side, though, PTOM, Public Transport Operating Model, our new contracts with suppliers has been a roaring success, really. Our in-service kilometres, for example, have gone up from 44.5 million to nearly 60 million. So we've had a 37% increase over about an 18-month period from prior to PTOM to once PTOM's fully implemented. So a 37% increase in in-service kilometres, and peak buses will go from just under 1,000 to 1,152. And the gross cost of that, though, is only a 7% increase for a cost increase for a 37% increase in service.
That's fantastic.
Kilometres. It is. It's great, really.
Need to make.
The customers don't beat a car pass through our door, really. It's not just PTOM. It's the new network itself. It's the success of the hop cards. It's projects like SAFE, the security and fare enforcement, that make travelling on public transport more user-friendly, as it were. So there's an awful lot, customer satisfaction now at 93%, which is even higher than what's in your quarterly report there. It's been a great achievement, really. As I said, the customers don't beat a path to our door. They They come here because we offer good services. But look, so that's the focus on the right-hand side of that slide, but really, as Lester has said, we need to redouble our efforts, and that's around that left-hand side of the slide, really. Getting people to the spines of public transport, or where it's really at. If I could just use an anecdote, the Northern Busway's gone up 8% in the last year. So in real terms, that represents about another 500 cars not on the road in the AM peak down that Northern Busway. And if you think about what we do with an Amity Busway or a Northwestern busway or tram route, and that's the sort of change that Auckland really needs. MRT, again, Lester's talked about that. I won't dwell on this. I think Councillor Lee mentioned the other day from his time on the AT board, he knows that we've been thinking about this since 2014, and we're a long way down track with that. One thing I would like to say, if you think back to CRL, there was a period of confusion there as to whether it was going to be funded by government or not. And I think that in many ways that didn't help our public messaging. There was a kind of thought allowed to grow out there that it was somehow Auckland's answer to the Circle Line, or it was going to benefit a whole lot of people in the city centre but not the vast majority of ratepayers and so forth. And it's done a lot to take away from the tremendous success and tremendous benefit that the City Rail Link will be when it's in. Yeah. And we mustn't allow that to happen with light rail. It's not some funky little system that'll make Auckland look like other grown-up cities. It's actually about bus congestion, 130 buses an hour down Simon Street, 5 buses going through every set of lights in peak hour. It's a dog's breakfast, and only something like light rail will fix that, really. And it's not simply about taking people off the aeroplanes and getting them into the CBD quickly. There's a whole lot of people out there working by the airport, and that number of people is growing rapidly all the time, often 24/7 or shift workers and so forth, and they need a decent public transport system of some sort, not just improvements on Kirkbride Road. And I guess the message there is that we're full speed ahead on this. We're not waiting for decisions or plans. We're developing the business case, and we're working closely with the Transport Agency around a solution, not a plan. Just a quick update on the EMUs. So the contract for the 15 EMUs has been signed with CAF of Spain. You'll recall the council earlier in the year, in June, signed off the 130 million for 15 new EMUs. They're on order now and underway. And just finally on to next steps, really.
Just before, if I could just say, so the EMU IPEMU issue is not quite resolved. Where it was left was when we understood how long it would take to electrify the route from Papakura to Pukekohe, and when that would start, how much it would cost. There would be a decision made. Whatever happens, the route Papakura-Pukekohe is going to be electrified, but if it's going to take longer than anticipated, then the RPMUs may be a useful solution, particularly with their utility around the Western Line when the CRL is being built. So that decision will come to a head quite soon.
How soon is that?
I would say before Christmas, probably. The big difference is that would be 17 IPMUs instead of 15 EMUs, and I dialogued again with NZT on that today, so Kiwi Rail has actually completed its work, so this should all happen quite quickly. So I think the message there is electrification is going to happen. If it takes a bit longer could be like 5 years from beginning to end, then the IPUs may be a valid option, if not. But the order has been signed, the production is in place, and CAF have got the small window where they could shift from one to the other quite easily. So we'll just let you know just as soon as that's clearer, but it's imminent.
Thank you. And look, just finally, next steps. I mean, as I started with, and as Lester mentioned, we've got a bit of strategy soup going on at the moment, and it's important to get through that as quickly as we can. Lester talked about value for money and the need to take our performance to the next level. Light rail, MRT, again, is keeping our attention. And we've got a period of stakeholder engagement coming up over the next several months as we get all of these plans to come together around a coherent story. Thank you.
Just of interest, the trains you keep, sorry, the light trams you keep showing for the light rail, is that are they the Spanish trains? Okay. And that is what's through most of Europe, in my observation, seems to be, yeah. Of interest, the Mayor and myself, well, and Councillor Darby went on a train that had been developed in Guangzhou, which was efficient and effective, but not...
Super capacitor,
Yeah.
working on a super capacitor,
Yes.
no overhead rail lines, and neatly mown grass between the tracks.
And that's, the grass is an issue. Zaragoza in Spain has that as well. There's some complexities around that, but it is very pretty. and it is doable. But yeah, so we are looking at that modern end, the super capacitor. So we will not,
Train with
the light rail in
lawnmowers on
Auckland will not have quaternary, and if it does, it will be very limited.
Yeah. The grass, of course, is about absorption and water stuff and that, rather than being pretty and coming to work behind a Fulton Hogan truck with a mower in front of it. Yeah.
Yeah, the trains weren't as aesthetically pleasing as those trains, it would be fair enough
Yeah,
to say.
they didn't look as flash, but they were very efficient.
Right, I have Councillor Simpson, Mayor Goff, Councillor Cooper and Councillor Darby.
Doesn't always
Councillor
have to
Watson
look
has
good.
Councillor Watson.
Doesn't always have to. Okay, thank you, gentlemen. I've got a couple of, I've got 3 questions, and my first one is around your performance target on fatalities. I mean, you can't help but mention that. It seems interesting for me that you are judged as a performance target on this, and yet we don't know how much of it is attributed to potentially poor driving, or you know, you mentioned safety belts being a key driver, as opposed to surface layout and design, which you are responsible for. So my question was, how come? And I heard that you're doing a report, so I just want to congratulate you on getting the clarity around that, because I think it's almost unfair of you to have that as a target when potentially the result of not meeting that target is a result of human error of their own volition.
Yes, so I think that is a very good question. What is very appealing about Strategy Zero is that there's a system responsibility which is shared, and there's you know, there's less concern about, of course there will always be bad drivers and those sort of things, but there's a lot of stuff we can do. Unfortunately, it's not all that convenient. So, for example, speed limitation is really critical. It's been very successful in Vision Zero. I mean, in Stockholm, for example, they've almost eliminated fatal car accidents. Rural roads, busy areas, school areas, they would have speed limitation. That is something that, you know, it's likely that many people might find inconvenient. One of the things that I think with our road safety is that convenience does trump safety, and that's something that we are going to have to turn around. There's going to need to be a real conversation with the community about how we do that.
Yeah.
But, you know, behind every one of these stories is this real human tragedy. So I think that we'll see what we get in our report. You know, I did say to the person doing our report, you know, there is a reputation in Auckland that people are quite bad drivers, and he says everyone always says that to him. So I think we have got somebody very good. I think we've got a good sense of this, but I do think we're talking, Councillor Simpson, about a paradigm shift here. Yeah. There are design issues, definitely, and there are bad drive issues, but those are more peripheral to the whole mechanism and our whole approach. So I think that could change, and we've seen it be very successful in different jurisdictions around the world. It does require leadership and alignment, though, because some people won't like it.
I support you on that. I suppose I'm just conscious of the fact that I didn't want, a common intersection or a regular place happening, and therefore that is our your responsibility. So,
If I can just add one thing to that. At the Auckland conversation where we had this expert, one of the things he said is transport engineers, are very orthodox and old-fashioned, and I was facilitating the questioning, and we had we had our head of transport services, Andrew Allen, on the panel, and I did ask him a question. I said, you being labelled as, the last bastion of orthodoxy and using old-fashioned textbooks, and his answer was quite interesting. He said, well, we are evolving and we need to evolve more. And I think even within Auckland Transport, we're going to have a different conversation with project managers and transport engineers about a more lateral kind of way of thinking, and try and give our people who do the engagement more, more influence, because often they're the people who are connected to the people who are living in the community, and often their advice is not taken on board in the way that it should. So we're just starting to notice that now, and I think that's a big difference that we can actually make. But that whole area, just because you're a qualified transport engineer doesn't mean you're an expert on everything. And so that's another big paradigm shift that we're working on in Auckland Transport.
I actually think that's one of the most positive things you've said today. And I say that from a community who just, has had an example where they just shake their head and say, how can you possibly suggest this when the practicality would be so easy if you just did this? And so I think that's fantastic news for Auckland, and I congratulate you on that change. My second question is, I see that the fuel sales continue to grow, 4% up on last year. Are you projecting a similar growth for the following year? Are you keeping, do you have any idea?
There's a reasonable relationship between the population, and yes, vehicle kilometres travelled have gone up for the last few years, which has been one of the drivers behind congestion, as well as fuel tax, of course. Fuel tax is ahead of budget. We haven't put that into our budgets for the future years, but it's something we're now looking at as a source of alleviating the pressure on rates and so forth. Won't be hugely significant, but yeah, we're seeing vehicle kilometres travelled are back on the rise again after being reasonably steady for a few years.
And my third question, thank you, is one around your pay and display machines. So, a lot of, in my area, my community is saying, why, with all the congestion and transport projects that you wish to have funding for, why are you taking out a very well-functioning pay and display machine and swapping it for a vehicle number plate recognition machine when you've got other more important things to do? What's happening to the old machines?
I think the other more important things to do argument, I think one of the things, I think Auckland Transport should be reasonably proud of is it actually manages to make a reasonable amount of progress on a very broad front. Yeah. So Lester mentioned our new parking app, which is already, I think it's about 13% market share after a very short period of time. It's surpassed the previous one in that. So the use of technology, it drives our costs down and it provides a better offering to customers by and large. Yes, people don't like change and they like to hang on to the pay and display machines. They tend to get vandalised. So it is a conscious decision of ours to move towards encouraging people to adopt technology and away from legacy systems, but accept that it's not popular with everybody.
And are you doing anything with the old machines or just ditching them?
Generally, the machines are being replaced at the end of their lives anyway. So I think we've got 700 of them around Auckland or something like that. So we've got a regular replacement program every year, which we can now scale back a little bit as we swap old machines out, really.
Okay, thank you.
Right, I have a roll call of 6, so it's in your hand, folks. Mayor Goff.
Two questions then. The 37% increase in deaths and serious injuries, it's hard to believe that all of the factors that generally contribute to those have suddenly got that much worse to produce that result in a year. People suddenly don't, in the space of year on year, decide to speed more, drink more, etc. So you'd first of all ask if it's a spike, and apparently the road toll, after having gone down for a decade, has now gone up over the last 4 or 5 years. So, you know, in order to work out how you solve the problem, you've got to address its causes, don't you? So what sort of analysis is, this is a nationwide problem as well as an Auckland problem, what sort of analysis is being done to say why this situation has got worse over 4 or 5 years and then so much worse this year?
Well, as I say, no one quite knows. Epidemiology is being looked at, but there's certainly factors this year are around speed, alcohol, and dangerous driving. You know, those are a factor, and those are the ones that lead to these multiple fatalities and injuries in a single car. So there's obviously issues around that, but there are spikes. I don't know. We will have the answer reasonably soon. But I'll give you an example. At one of our hospitals, we've got an 80 increase in acute orthopedics when the population is growing about 3%, and of course the ageing is a factor. So there's something just generally, Goff, about accidents that we just don't understand, because it's not just road accidents. So in some places there's like a mini epidemic of accidents. So we can only just speculate, but I think that Vision Zero gives us a real opportunity, and we've just got to up the education. You know, you could take 100 deaths out of the fatalities if people were wearing seatbelts, for example.
That would be a simpler fix.
Yeah.
Thank you. The second question is just with the emphasis on mass rapid transit, how quickly you can move. You've mentioned that the government has a huge amount of momentum to get this done, and parliamentary terms are 3 years, so you can understand that. It was suggested you could do to Mount Roskill in 4 years and the airport within 10. AT thinks that's probably too ambitious, but I'm just wondering what you think is a realistic timetable to get light rail across the isthmus, one, and across Mangere to the airport precinct and maybe out to Manukau. What sort of realistic time frame would you be able to deliver that in?
Maybe I could jump in first. I think, like any good public servant, the answer is it depends really, and I think it critically depends on two things. One is the consenting processes and the basically ability to get at the land, and the other is the procurement process and the extent to which documents go out there and get poured over by people. In other words, the extent to which you specify exactly which widgets go where at the get-go, as opposed to get out there earlier, perhaps take a bit more risk on both price and performance and let the market sort it out once it's out there. But I mean, if you look at overseas jurisdictions that have tried to have relatively accelerated projects, they still talk in terms of years, not anything shorter than 4 years. I wouldn't have thought.
I think if the consenting process can be accelerated through some kind of, this is inverted commas, enabling regulation or legislation, you could do a lot in 3 years. You know, you really could. Rolling stock from ordering to delivery would be 24 months.
Yeah, like CRL, it's not off a standing start either. You know, we've already got a lot of work.
We've done a lot of work. Okay. You could get a lot done in 3 to 4 years. I think the sort of the timeframes that you've got are reasonable. They're probably, erring on the side of optimism. But if we can get the planning process enabled, that's the main rate limiting step.
And finally, if I just ask a supplementary on that, in terms of priority for light rail, because light rail could conceivably cover the whole of the city as a mass transit network. You talked about the importance of dealing with bus congestion. Is the greatest bus congestion between CBD, Queen Street, Simon Street, Dominion Road? Is that the most bus congested area? That's the logical area to start.
It is. In a lot of these issues, they're quite contestable. I think this is one where you can make an answer really quite easily. That is definitely the right place to start.
Evidence is there.
Okay.
It's no coincidence that all the traffic modelling that was done back in 2014-15 and that pretty much resulted in duplicating the old tram network for Auckland.
Yeah.
Is the answer. I mean,
That's not the only,
Down
really-
each of the main roads on the
Exactly.
isthmus.
Yeah.
that's not the only city in the world that's the case, though.
Yeah,
Sydney.
Melbourne, there's.
thank you.
Right, we have Councillor Cooper,
Sorry, I
Councillor
don't have
Darby, Councillor Watson,
time
Councillor
now,
Fletcher,
so
Councillor Wayne
I
Walker, and
I'm
Councillor
getting
Cooper's
picked
got to
up
go.
at one, so I just have to go down.
Okay,
So
right.
someone can take my.
Okay, and Member Typery is about to leave as well, so we're getting close to the quorum, so Councillor Darby.
Thank you, gentlemen. Just following up on the deaths and serious injuries, and Lester, I'm really encouraged to hear that the board is taking that really seriously. It's something I've been inquiring about, and I saw that I think Richard, you replied to me that it was on the board agenda, and there was a specific targeted body of work. Just the other day, some of us, Councillor Clough, Councillor Cooper, myself, Councillor Hills, we met with the Waimata District Commander, Natasha Penny, and her area commanders. And we talked about this very thing. It's of concern to the district commanders and area commanders. We're the Vision Zero, of course, and it's encouraging to hear you talk about, reduced speed zones. I think that's something that we need to get onto, and we need to get over this convenience counter-argument and really just demonstrate just how much blood is on the tracks here, because it's quite serious. But one of the interesting things that District Commander Tasha Penny said to us, she just posed a question. She says, so where do you think the chance of harm in our society is greatest? Question, in brackets was, is it homicide? Is it being mugged in the street? Is it meth or etc.? And she said the chance of harm is greatest with your own car. And it really stunned me, and I wrote it down. And I think that really just wakes us up to the challenge that we've got in front of us. And she related it to alcohol, as you did, speed. She asked for support in the rollout of red light cameras, our support. She wants our support in doing that. So I think there's opportunity for Auckland Transport, Auckland Council and police to work together on that. She also said there's a spike in the number of new scooter riders who are coming off and injuring themselves and dying. So, look, I guess my plea is let's prioritise this. Let's actually do something about this and actually implement the Vision Zero projects, 30k zones. Let's implement red light cameras and not, as some might do later on, criticise those as revenue gatherers. This is a serious and deadly problem that we have that we're going to have to address.
Thank you for that. And I think I didn't say when the Mayor asked the question earlier, not only working with the health authorities on this, we're also working closely with ACC. We have Paula Repstock on our board as the chair of the ACC as well, so we've all got concerns, we've all got information. But yeah, I think we're just going to have to make tougher decisions, and it's interesting in Vision Zero in the initial phases, enforcement is really quite important.
Councillor Watson.
I'll be really quick. Does Auckland Transport, and I don't know if you have the answer, does Auckland Transport report publicly all the incidents of major graffitiing, like that graffiti bombing, or do you have a policy of keeping it quiet?
Oh, neither really. I mean, graffiti happens all around the city all the time, and it's not just on our network, it's elsewhere as well. So
I'm talking about the incidents like Baldwin Ave where they stopped the train and did the whole train.
Well, one of the reasons they do it is for the profile. It's often self-reported. One of those major incidents was people came to New Zealand deliberately to do it. They weren't New Zealanders. But no, we don't have a deliberate policy. But once again, there's a lot of societal issues that impact us. I mean, we've got just a constant problem with vandalism of all sort. That kind of vandalism is also quite dangerous because it is a form of terror attack in a sense, for the people who are actually involved on the platform or in the train itself.
Certainly, I agree, Lester. In that instance, the board want to have the police got anyone? That?
No.
No, okay, thanks.
I don't know if you recall, there was actually one incident where the train was graffitied by a group of so-called ninjas whilst it was moving.
John, was your one, isn't it?
As we stopped.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yes. Could have been those turtles coming back. Councillor Fletcher.
Oh, Mr. Chairman, thank you very much. I think having these quarterly reviews is helpful. So I thought that I would ask the question on behalf of Rodney for a change in terms of performance on our rural roads and road sealing. How are we going, Richard?
Yes.
In budgetary terms, we're well ahead of the 3-year target that we said we would spend on sealing rural roads, and I might also say we did a little road on Waiheke as well that wasn't on the program. In kilometres, you know, the roads that were on the program that we said we would do will be done within the 3 years as well, so we'll have delivered on that program.
Kenny Webster will be pleased. We will pass that
Councillor
on.
Sayers
Thanks
didn't
to
need to
her.
ask because he was assured that he would do that thing. Councillor Wayne Walker.
Sure. Just have a question about a problem that I've observed and am engaging in a number of locations around the region, and that goes to, I don't know whether you call them local design initiatives or what, but circumstances where there is a design change. It could be a cycleway that's going in, it could be a change to a local shopping complex in terms of transport, and the problem that's arising where the change is being hugely disruptive to local businesses. Instances where businesses can be suffering 10, 20, 30, 40% decline in their business because what's occurred has not been adequately consulted with some of the business is concerned, and it's just not practical. So I just put to you that certainly what I'm observing is a need, and I'm picking up on that approach you said around more lateral engagement with some of the players that are being affected, and are being affected considerably.
Yeah, so look, this is a serious concern. I mean, one of there are issues here that are difficult to manage. You know, sometimes when the consultation happens, people don't take it very seriously, and when the implementation happens, then they've got a lot of concerns. But this is another area where we are looking for a shift, and I've been engaged in quite a lot of these personally, and I'll visit them myself and speak to people and get written to, so it's not something that I'm remote from as chairman. We're having a session that I've called for in January, which is a bit of what I spoke earlier to Desley Simpson's question. We have people who are doing the engagement who their message doesn't get taken on board. So we've got to give them more influence in the organisation. The other thing is we are going to develop a principle-based approach, because often if we just have that and it's understood, then it works better. And the other thing is, and we've got this with one of the cycleways at the moment, 80% of it is actually really good. 20% of it, there's some very poor workmanship that has caused real problems, and that should have been addressed earlier, and that is being addressed. And then the other parts of it are just caused by really well-meaning people in our organisation implementing compromises that are completely stupid and don't work very well, and don't work for what we're trying to achieve. So I think we just have to have this principle-based approach. So, for example, you wouldn't have a cycle lane and then just keep one car park because it's really important, and then you've got the cycle lane now not properly aligned with where it was. That's an actual example at the moment. But this is, it's not something we're ignoring. The new chief executive, this is in his top 3, okay, because this is something that we just haven't been able to get on top of in a satisfactory way.
Okay.
So it is a big issue. We are looking at it. Oh, sorry, last point is project managers need to have much greater oversight and much greater engagement with people who have the consequences of these implementations and not be remote from them.
I'll follow that up, Mr Chair. Thank you very much, Leslie.
Could I just add a little quick one? We have got something called the Roads and Streets Framework, so that's been under development for a while. If you look at what we did with parking a few years ago, where we have a parking strategy that says when this happens, we're going to do this, and this is what, it basically lays out a blueprint that we then cookie cutter later. The Roads and Streets Framework is exactly that around, should this bit be a bus lane, should it be parking, should it be cycleways, because all those competing demands, it's impossible to keep even a majority of people happy with a lot of that. The other thing we're looking at too is, and if Councillor Cooper was here, I'm sure she'd talk about Te Atatu Road at length and that. We've looked at whether or not we don't close roads almost completely sometimes and just get in there and bang it and get in, get out and finish it and cause massive disruption for a very short period of time rather than extracting the tooth slowly and prolonging the pain really.
Because in addition to that, that is very frustrating to people when they see nothing happening and then something happening. If we could just get in there with massive activity and then just move on, and actually even have some of these sites just being completed and moved along. Some of that is a little more expensive.
So I've got the answer, Mr Chair. I'll just say one thing, and this is just one example. This is a business that's gone down the tubes. The owner's lost $1 million. So this is the sort of impact we're talking about. It's not paltry stuff for people that are experiencing it. Thank you.
I think we know that Te Atatu Road was quite a saga. Right, we have very last, Councillor Lee.
Thank you, gentlemen. Lester's comment about the unfamiliarity of new directors with local government terminology does remind me that in Auckland, unlike anywhere else in New Zealand, there is no regional land transport committee which is made up of councillors and users and democratically based. The Auckland Transport directors are the Regional Land Transport Committee in Auckland. They metamorphosise from being directors to that committee very, very quickly. But I'm not sure whether that's robust way of doing things in terms of checks and balances. But Lester, I want to raise with you concerns in my electorate. You'll be aware that there's a bit of a firestorm in Grey Lynn around, not actually the cycleway itself, but the way Auckland Transport has gone about consulting and building it. So, and that's the source of a lot of complaints, and it's not going away soon. But I think there needs to be learnings taken from that.
That was my point.
I'm not sure whether staff really understand the legal meaning of consultation, that you have to be willing to change your mind. So I'll make that point. The Parnell station was opened in March with much celebration. I'm happy to see patronage is up to about 3,500 a week, but it's still not finished. And for months, nothing has happened. There are precast concrete steps for the platform lying in the grass, now being overgrown with weeds. The Nichols Lane connection to the university has been delayed, and the wayfinding to the museum is also a source of complaints from the museum. So I would urge that some focus be given to the Parnell station to finish the job, and rather than leaving it half finished. Just one final point about the light rail project. As you know, I was always fully in agreement with that. I have to say I was disappointed and continue to be disappointed when the project morphed into an aerial connection rather than a solution to congestion on the isthmus. And my real concern is the exclusion. My concern is not having a light rail option to the airport. Well, fine, if you can afford it, why not? But my real concern and it's tragic really, and it'll have to be fixed, is excluding the option of heavy rail to the airport. And I'm encouraged to see the Victorian government, the Victorian Premier, announce this week that their choice, Melbourne's choice, the biggest tram city in the world, is for a heavy rail connection to the airport. So I can signal to you and everyone else that this issue is not going to go away, because I think if we settled on a light rail option instead of a heavy rail option for Auckland International Airport, we'd be making a big mistake and selling Auckland short.
Here.
Could I just make a quick response on the Parnell? We will get on top of that, and we'll report back to you, so thank you for that. There is potential, it's just conceptual at the moment. Ryman are putting up a big village there, and they've met with us about ways in which, working together, we can use what happens to be the collective land in order to make much better connections, much better options, much better transport, pedestrian, cycle and access. So that's being worked on, which could actually augment that whole area really quite well. So that's quite positive. Just in terms of when we discussed on Wednesday, we are still investigating heavy rail to the airport, but that would be through a Puinui connection. But that hasn't been taken off. It's not like shut down. We're still investigating all of those options. Okay.
Well, that's good to hear, because you'll need to rescind the board resolution which uses the word excluded or discounted heavy rail in favour of advanced bus and light rail, if you recall that one.
We're happy to look at that at the right time.
Thank you.
Right.
Is that it?
No, I just want one more. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Wonderful. I just really pricked my ears up at that last statement that you made, that's still investigating Puinui to the airport. Your investigation, have you had any conversations with Ports of Auckland as part of that investigation? Because I understand that land use and activities are a challenge in that location, and they would be part of the challenge and I guess part of the solution if you were to pursue that.
Yeah. Yeah, no, there are a range of these discussions, and I mean, this is an evolving picture. We don't have time to talk through it all, but you know, the third main is a real priority to get everything else going. We're looking at how we could introduce and what the cost of 10-minute frequencies on the rail line could be right now. So there's a lot of options that we're looking at, because you really just see the appetite in the population for modal shift. So we are looking at all of these options, talking to all of these people. I guess that some of the decisions will be out of our hands. Some of these are political decisions, like the light rail, but we're very supportive of that. But yeah, we're working quite actively on all of these options. Agencies, different agencies are actually working very well together.
Thank you, Lester. Right, well, that's it, folks, and thank you very much. We'll pass the resolution, which is thanking...
Happy to second.
Giving all the reports. Well, we've got a mover and a seconder.
Done.
We'll thank Lester and Richard. So I'll put those resolution A, B, C. All those in favour?
Aye.
Against? Thank you very much. And for councillors, lunch is downstairs and the workshop is in the chamber downstairs.
That's not here.
Not here.
Why here? Why not up here? That's all.
The
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Thank you, councillors.
Thank you, Lester.